Let's talk about heated rivalry, happy endings, and the Hays Code. Welcome back to Yesterqueers. My name's Amanda, and I'm a public historian of queer history. This video does contain light spoilers for episodes 5 and 6 of Heated Rivalry, so if you don't want to see those, scroll away now. I had a different video queued up for today, but as my friend BJ and I were dissecting the finale over text this morning, like you do, it struck me how few examples we have of queer couples getting their sun-drenched happily ever after in mainstream films and television series. There are certainly some smaller films like Carol, The Handmaiden, Moonlight that had their moment in the zeitgeist, and those films at least end on an up note. I wouldn't exactly call any of them sun-drenched. And there are dozens of wonderful indie films and direct-to-streaming series that feature queer joy in all of its glorious diversity. But I'm talking about the kinds of movies and TV series that have the power to shape culture, and the kinds of endings that show queer couples in love getting their grand gesture or their drive off into the sunset. Red, White, and Royal Blue, Glee, and Schitt's Creek have all been in the last decade, and the pickings get even slimmer when you start to look earlier than 2015. And there is a reason for that beyond simple homophobia and transphobia. And the reason is this dude, William Harrison Hays, Harding's Postmaster General, who became the president of what was then called the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America in 1922. He is the creator of the Motion Picture Production Code, otherwise known as the Hays Code. We've talked before about how queer the early days of cinema were on both sides of the camera. The first kiss ever captured on film is not Edison's The Kiss. It's two nude women on a Philadelphia rooftop shot by Edward Muybridge in the 1880s. Movies through the 1920s could be subversive, racy, and remarkably progressive. And for a brief period of time after the 1929 stock market crash, movies became even more salacious as movie studios tried to lure people into spending their dwindling pocket money on going to the movies. But under increasing pressure from local censorship boards and fearing that the federal government would start censoring movies, Hollywood studios decided to censor themselves and voluntarily adopted the Hays Code in 1934 with the goal of making sure that no movies and later television shows would lower the moral standards of the audience. The code dictated everything from how alcohol was to be shown to which parts of a woman's body could be shown and how. And it absolutely forbid showing anything perverse or deviant unless the characters who exhibited those characteristics got their comeuppance, usually by dying. Having queer characters in your movie was fine as long as they didn't make it to the end of the story with their dignity or their lives intact. This is the root of the modern bury your gays trope and the reason that tragedy is so often the outcome of queer stories on screen. Especially stories about traditionally masculine cis men, cowboys, veterans, corporate lawyers. The Hays Code showed a world where the good men were heroic, stoic, and straight, showing emotion only in the most extreme circumstances, and even then, only in a controlled and dignified way. A lot of American men's current aversion to tenderness and care can also be traced back to the Hays Code. The Hays Code was only in use for 34 years. It was replaced in 1968 by the rating system that we still use today. But that was 34 formative years. Just think of how much of what we now consider to be American culture crossed movie and then television screens between 1934 and 1968. Think of how many of those stories produced under the Hays Code laid the foundations for the stories that we tell today. Think of how many of our storytellers grew up watching code-compliant movies. Steven Spielberg was born in 1946. The Hays Code hardwired a lot of terrible things into how we tell visual stories in the US. But the need for queer characters, as well as black characters and other characters of color, to be punished, often by death, for transgressing moral standards is perhaps the most insidious. At a time when the US government seems hell-bent on destroying queer people's lives, and queer characters are disappearing from our screens at an alarming rate, we desperately needed the shot of joy and catharsis that Heated Rivalry gave us. I don't think this series could have been produced in the US today, not with the care and respect that Jacob Tierney and the entire Heated Rivalry team showed, not just for the source material, but for the hearts of all of the queer people watching. There were so many moments in this series that we needed, and we never had to brace for the heartbreak that comes from having queer joy destroyed for the sake of upping the stakes or furthering the plot. We knew that Scott and Kip and Shane and Ilya were all going to get their moments in the sun, and through them, we did too. That's it for today.